In the brutal heat of Blackridge, a fallen noblewoman stands at the edge of ruin, her title worthless, her step-relative ready to sell her like livestock to pay his debts. But Eleanor Whitmore refuses to be owned. When the hunters come, she'll choose the river's fury over chains and discover that survival demands more than dignity. It demands blood, courage, and the will to fight back. This is her story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Eleanor's journey travels. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. The sun hung over Blackridge like a punishment. Eleanor Whitmore stood in the narrow strip of shade beside the Silver Ridge Saloon, her gloved hands folded against the dust-caked fabric of her traveling dress. The garment had once been fine, deep burgundy with ivory piping, tailored in a Philadelphia drawing room by hands that understood elegance. Now the hem was torn, the piping stained brown from the trail, and the bodice loose where she'd been forced to sell the corset stays for passage west. She didn't look at the men who passed. Their eyes crawled over her anyway. Inside the saloon, Wade Whitmore was drinking himself toward oblivion. Again. She could hear the slurred cadence of his voice through the warped boards, punctuated by laughter that didn't belong to him. He'd been her late husband's half-brother, a connection so distant it barely warranted the word family. But when Richard died and the creditors came, Wade had appeared with papers, lawyers, and a smile that promised protection. That had been 8 months ago. Now she understood what his protection was worth. Eleanor shifted her weight, feeling the blister on her left heel break open again. She'd walked 4 miles that morning to fetch Wade from a poker game in the rail camp. He'd promised her it was the last time, that after this, they'd have enough to buy passage to California, where his cousin ran a lumber concern, and there were opportunities for a man willing to work. She'd stopped believing him 3 towns ago. The saloon door banged open. A man staggered out, narrow-shouldered, sunburned, reeking of sweat and rot-gut whiskey. He saw Eleanor and grinned, showing teeth the color of old piano keys. "Well now," he drawled, "ain't you a cold drink of water?" Eleanor turned her face away. "I'm speaking to you, darling." "I'm waiting for someone," she said quietly. "Waiting for Wade Whitmore?" The man laughed. "Hell, you'll be waiting till Christmas. He's 3 sheets gone and digging deeper." She said nothing. The man took a step closer. Eleanor could smell the tobacco on his breath, see the grime embedded in the creases of his neck. "You his woman?" "I'm his sister-in-law." "That a fact." His grin widened. "Pretty thing like you, stuck with a fool like Wade. That's a waste, if you ask me." "I didn't." For a moment, something ugly flickered across his face. Then he spat into the dirt and walked off, muttering under his breath. Eleanor let out a slow breath and pressed her shoulders back. She'd learned that much, at least, how to make herself steel when the situation called for it. Panic accomplished nothing. Tears bought no mercy. The sun inched higher. Inside, the noise grew louder. Someone broke a glass. A chair scraped. Wade's voice rose above the din, insistent and defensive. Then the door opened again. This time, the man who stepped out was different. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a build that suggested labor, not leisure. His coat was black, tailored but travel-worn, and beneath it he wore a vest with a watch chain that caught the light. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face carved from hard angles and old scars. But it was his eyes that stopped her, cold, measuring, absolutely devoid of warmth. He looked at Eleanor the way a butcher might assess a side of beef. "You're Eleanor Whitmore," he said. Not a question. She straightened. "I am." "Name's Coltrane. I've got business with your brother-in-law." "He's indisposed." "I can see that." Coltrane's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Doesn't change the fact that he owes me money." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "How much?" $1,200. The number hit her like a fist. 1,200. That was more than Wade had claimed to lose in the poker game. More than he'd borrowed to stake his claim in the silver speculation. More than... "That's not possible," she said. "It's very possible, Mrs. Whitmore. Your brother-in-law signed a note 3 months back. Principal, interest, penalties for late payment. It adds up." Coltrane tilted his head slightly. "He tell you about that?" "No." "Didn't think so." He glanced toward the saloon door. "I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. Wade's got till sundown to settle his account." He doesn't have $1,200. Then he'd better find it. Eleanor's pulse hammered in her throat. What happens if he doesn't? Coltrane studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her without a word. Eleanor unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a contract, legal language, dense and formal, but the terms were clear enough. In the event of default, Wade Whitmore agreed to transfer all assets and holdings to satisfy the debt. And at the bottom, beneath Wade's scrawled signature, there was a handwritten addendum, including any dependents or relations in his custody. The words blurred. "You can't be serious," what Eleanor whispered. "I'm always serious about money, Mrs. Whitmore. This is—" She couldn't finish. The enormity of it choked her. "This is slavery. This is a contract, signed, witnessed, and legally binding in the territory of Wyoming." Coltrane took the paper back and folded it carefully. "Your brother-in-law put you up as collateral. That makes you my concern now." "I'm not property. Tell that to the judge." Coltrane's tone didn't change. "Sundown, Mrs. Whitmore. If Wade can't pay, you'll be coming with me." He turned and walked back into the saloon. Eleanor stood frozen, her mind racing. This couldn't be real. Men didn't trade women like livestock, not anymore, not in civilized places. But Blackridge wasn't civilized. It was a railroad town, a mining camp, a collection of tents and clapboard shacks where law meant whoever had the biggest gun and the best lawyer. And Wade had signed her away like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. She had to think. The locket. Eleanor's hand went to her throat, where the small gold pendant hung beneath her collar. It had been her mother's, the last thing of value she owned. She'd promised herself she'd never sell it, but if it could buy her freedom, no. Even if she sold it, it wouldn't fetch a fraction of what Wade owed. And Coltrane didn't look like a man who negotiated. She had to run. The thought arrived with cold clarity. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't wait for Wade to sober up and beg forgiveness or make promises he'd never keep. Couldn't trust that Coltrane would show mercy. If she stayed, she'd be dragged off to wherever men like Coltrane took women they'd purchased, and she'd spend the rest of her life regretting that she hadn't fought harder. Eleanor glanced up and down the street. No one was watching. The town was drowsy in the afternoon heat, most folks taking shelter indoors. If she moved now, quickly, quietly, she might make it to the edge of town before anyone noticed. And then what? She pushed the question aside, one step at a time. Eleanor turned and walked, not toward the main street where the stagecoach office and the rail depot would be watched, not toward the camp where Wade's so-called friends would sell her out for the price of a drink. She headed east toward the low hills beyond the town limits, where the land turned wild and the roads became trails. Her heels were not made for this. Within 10 minutes, the blisters had opened into raw, weeping sores. She kept walking. The sun bore down. Behind her, Blackridge receded, first into a smudge of smoke and noise, then into silence. Eleanor didn't look back. The terrain grew rougher as the afternoon wore on. She followed what looked like an old cattle path, winding through sagebrush and scrub pine. Her dress snagged on thorns. Sweat soaked through the fabric, plastering it to her skin. She had no water, no food, no map, just the blind, desperate hope that distance would save her. By the time the sun began to sink, her legs were shaking. Eleanor stopped to rest beneath a twisted juniper, collapsing onto the dirt. Her hands were scratched and bleeding. Her hair had come loose from its pins, falling in damp tangles around her face. She looked down at herself, at the ruined dress, the torn gloves, the bloody stockings, and felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. A lady. That's what she'd been. A lady with a townhouse in Philadelphia, invitations to society dinners, and a husband who'd promised her security. Now she was a fugitive in the wilderness, running from a debt collector who thought he owned her. The laugh died. She had to keep moving. Eleanor forced herself upright and stumbled forward. The path narrowed, climbing into a rocky defile where the shadows pooled thick and cold. She could hear water somewhere ahead, a creek maybe, or a spring. If she could find it, she could rest, drink, figure out her next move. The sound of hoofbeats froze her in place. Eleanor turned, her heart slamming against her ribs. 3 riders crested the ridge behind her, silhouetted against the dying light. She recognized the man in front immediately. Wade. He was slumped in the saddle, his face pale and sweating. Beside him rode Coltrane, straight-backed and impassive. The third man was younger, heavily armed, with a rifle slung across his back. "Eleanor!" Wade's voice cracked. "Eleanor, wait!" She ran. The path twisted sharply, dropping into a steep ravine. Eleanor half slid, half fell down the slope, rocks skittering beneath her feet. She could hear the riders behind her, shouting, their horses crashing through the brush. She didn't stop. The sound of water grew louder. Eleanor burst through a thicket of willows and stumbled to a halt. She was standing on the edge of a river. It wasn't wide, maybe 30 feet across, but it was fast, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. The current churned white over submerged rocks, roaring loud enough to drown out thought. On the far side, the land rose steeply into a wall of pine forest. No bridge, no ford, no way across. Behind her, the hoofbeats grew closer. Eleanor looked at the river, then back at the riders. Wade broke through the trees first, his horse stumbling to a stop. "Eleanor, please." "Stay back," she said. "Eleanor, listen to me. You sold me." Her voice shook. "You signed a contract and you sold me like I was livestock." Wade flinched. "I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. They would have killed me." "So you killed me instead." Wade opened his mouth, but no words came. Coltrane rode up beside him, calm and unhurried. He looked at Eleanor, then at the river, and nodded slowly. "End of the line, Mrs. Whitmore. I won't go with you." "You don't have a say in the matter." "I do." Eleanor took a step back, her heels at the water's edge. "I'd rather die than belong to you." Coltrane's expression didn't change. "That's a waste. Maybe. But it's my choice." For a moment, no one moved. Then Eleanor turned and stepped into the river. The current hit her like a freight train. Her feet went out from under her instantly, the water ice-cold and brutal. She gasped, sucking in a mouthful of silt and foam, and the river pulled her under. She fought, kicking, clawing, but the current was stronger than anything she'd ever felt. It dragged her downstream, smashing her against rocks, filling her lungs with freezing darkness. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world became roaring white noise and cold, and the certainty that this was how it ended, drowning in a nameless river in the middle of nowhere, alone and forgotten. Then something caught her. A branch. A log. She couldn't tell. Eleanor grabbed it with both hands, gasping, her vision blurred and spinning. The current tried to rip her away, but she held on, her fingers numb and slipping. The riverbank was close, 10 feet, maybe less. She kicked toward it, her legs heavy and useless, her dress tangled around her knees. Her hands gave out. Eleanor went under again, and this time she didn't fight. The cold seeped into her bones, and the roaring faded, and she thought, distantly, almost peacefully, that at least it was over. She didn't feel the hands that pulled her from the water, didn't hear the voice that shouted her name. The darkness took her, and for a long time there was nothing. When Eleanor woke, the first thing she felt was warmth. Not the brutal, punishing heat of the desert sun, but the gentle, steady warmth of a fire. It radiated against her skin, soaking into her aching muscles, and for a moment she thought she might still be dreaming. Then the pain hit, her ribs throbbed, her head pounded, her throat burned like she'd swallowed broken glass. Eleanor tried to move and couldn't. Her body felt weighted down, wrapped in something heavy and rough. Blankets. She forced her eyes open. The room was small, dim, and unfamiliar. Rough-hewn log walls, a low ceiling, a stone fireplace where flames crackled and spat. The air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and something else. Leather, maybe, or saddle oil. Eleanor turned her head and saw a man sitting in a chair by the fire. He was older than she'd expected. Mid-40s, perhaps, with graying hair and a weathered face. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and his hands were scarred and calloused. He was whittling something, a piece of wood, though she couldn't tell what, and he didn't look up when she stirred. "You're awake," he said quietly. Eleanor tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She coughed instead, a harsh, ragged sound that sent pain shooting through her chest. The man set down his knife and reached for a tin cup on the hearth. He crossed to her side and held it out. "Drink. Slow." Eleanor took the cup with shaking hands. The water was cool and clean, and it soothed the rawness in her throat.
She drank until the cup was empty, then handed it back. "Thank you," she rasped. The man nodded and returned to his chair. "Name's Silas Granger. You're in my cabin, about 8 miles upriver from where you went in." Eleanor blinked. "You pulled me out. Saw you go under. Figured I'd fish you out before the rocks finished you off." She looked down at herself.
Someone had stripped off her wet dress and wrapped her in a rough wool blanket. Her hair was loose, still damp, and her skin was mottled with bruises. "Where are my clothes?" "Drying by the fire. They're not much good anymore, but they'll do till you're steady enough to move." "Move where?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He picked up his whittling again, the knife making soft, rhythmic scrapes against the wood. "That depends." "You planning to tell me why you jumped in the river?" Eleanor hesitated. "I didn't jump. I chose it." "Chose drowning?" "Chose not to be owned." Silas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Who was trying to own you?" "A man named Coltrane. My stepbrother-in-law owed him money. Signed a contract putting me up as collateral." The knife stopped moving. "Wade Whitmore." Eleanor stared. "You know him?" "Know of him. Came through here a few months back trying to buy land he didn't have money for." Silas shook his head. "Didn't know he had family." "I'm not his family. Not really. I was married to his half-brother. When my husband died, Wade, he said he'd help me. Instead, he used me." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he set the knife down again. "You got anywhere to go?" Eleanor swallowed. "No." "No family? No friends?" "No." "Money?" She thought of the locket, still hanging around her neck beneath the blanket. "Nothing that matters?" Silas nodded slowly. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkening sky. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll take you into town. There's a settlement about 20 miles south. You can figure things out from there." "They'll find me," Eleanor said quietly. "Coltrane won't stop. And Wade, he'll tell them where I went." "Then you'll need to go farther." "How far is far enough?" Silas turned to look at her. "That's something you'll have to figure out yourself, Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor closed her eyes. She was so tired. Tired of running. Tired of being afraid. Tired of the weight of everything she'd lost pressing down on her chest. But Silas was right. She couldn't stay here. Couldn't expect a stranger to shield her from men like Coltrane. She had to keep moving, even if it killed her. Eleanor slept fitfully that night, her dreams tangled with images of the river, the cold, the darkness, the certainty of drowning. She woke several times to find Silas still sitting by the fire, keeping watch. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just let her rest. By morning, the worst of the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. Silas brought her clothes, stiff and wrinkled from drying, but intact. Eleanor dressed slowly, her muscles protesting every movement. When she emerged from the small back room where she'd slept, Silas had coffee waiting. "You'll need food," he said, handing her a plate. "It's a long ride." Eleanor looked at the plate. Beans, cornbread, and strips of salted meat. Simple fare, but more than she'd had in days. She ate slowly, savoring every bite. Silas watched her from across the table. "You ever ridden a horse?" "A few times. Not well." "You'll manage. I've got an old mare that's gentle enough. She'll get you where you need to go." Eleanor set down her fork. "Why are you helping me?" Silas shrugged. "No good reason, I suppose. Maybe I just don't like men who think they can own people." "That's reason enough." They finished the meal in silence. Then Silas stood and gestured toward the door. "Come on, I'll show you the lay of the land." Outside, the morning was cool and bright. The cabin sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by pine-covered hills. A creek ran nearby, its waters clear and swift. Eleanor could see a small corral where 2 horses grazed, and beyond that, a weathered barn. "This is your place?" she asked. "Has been for near 10 years. Used to run cattle, but the market dried up. Now I just keep enough to get by." "It's quiet." "That's the point." Silas walked toward the corral and whistled. One of the horses, a dappled gray mare, ambled over. He stroked her neck. "This is Rosie. She's old, but she's steady. She'll carry you south without any fuss." Eleanor approached cautiously. The mayor regarded her with dark, patient eyes. What about you? What about me? Won't you need her? I've got another horse, and I don't go far these days. Silas opened the gate and led the mare out. I'll saddle her up. You should be ready to leave within the hour. Eleanor nodded, though the thought of riding 20 miles made her ribs ache all over again. She watched as Silas worked, efficient, practiced, his hands sure and steady. He didn't talk much, but there was a kindness in the way he moved, a quiet decency that reminded her of better men she'd known. Silas, she said quietly, thank you for everything. He glanced at her, then back at the saddle. Don't thank me yet. You've still got a long way to go. Even so. Silas didn't answer, but something in his expression softened, just a little. They were almost ready to leave when Eleanor heard it. Hoofbeats. Silas heard it too. He straightened, his hand going instinctively to the rifle leaning against the fence. Get inside, he said. What? Now. Eleanor didn't argue. She ran for the cabin, her heart hammering. Behind her, she heard Silas calling out, a sharp, commanding tone she hadn't heard before. She reached the door and turned. 3 riders were coming up the valley trail. Coltrane, Wade, and the third man, the one with the rifle. They'd found her. Eleanor's legs locked. She stood in the cabin doorway, one hand gripping the frame, watching the 3 riders approach through the morning haze. The distance between them and the cabin was shrinking fast. 200 yards, maybe less. Coltrane rode in front, his black coat unmistakable even at this distance. Wade hunched beside him, looking half dead in the saddle. The third man, the younger one with the rifle, scanned the valley with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Silas didn't move from his position by the corral. The rifle was in his hands now, held low but ready. He stood with the kind of stillness that spoke of calculation rather than fear. I told you to get inside, he said without turning. Eleanor's throat tightened. They'll kill you. Maybe. Get inside anyway. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that running had gotten her nowhere and hiding would accomplish even less. But her feet carried her backward, into the dim interior of the cabin, and she pressed herself against the wall beside the window where she could still see. The riders slowed as they reached the edge of Silas's property. Coltrane raised one hand, a gesture that might have been greeting or warning. His horse stopped 20 feet from where Silas stood. Morning, Coltrane said. His voice carried easily across the quiet valley. Silas didn't reply. We're looking for someone, Coltrane continued. A woman. Dark hair, maybe 35. Probably hurt. You seen anyone like that? This is private land, Silas said evenly. You're trespassing. Coltrane's mouth twitched. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Wade shifted in his saddle. Silas, please. She's my family. We just want to make sure she's safe. Your family. Silas's tone didn't change, but something hard entered his expression. That the same family you sold to pay your debts? Wade flinched. It's not like that. Then what's it like? It's complicated. Doesn't sound complicated to me. Sounds like you signed a contract and now you're here to collect. Coltrane leaned forward slightly. This doesn't concern you, Mr. Granger. We have a legal agreement with Mrs. Whitmore. If she's here, she needs to come with us. She's not here. You mind if we take a look? I do. The younger man with the rifle shifted, his hand moving toward the weapon slung across his back. Silas's eyes flicked to him, then back to Coltrane. You're welcome to try, Silas said quietly, but I'll drop at least one of you before you get within 10 feet of this cabin. Maybe 2, if I'm lucky. Coltrane studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, a thin, humorless expression. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I don't recall asking for your opinion. She jumped in a river to get away from us. Does that sound like a woman who wants to be found? Sounds like a woman who'd rather die than go with you, Silas said, which tells me everything I need to know about your legal agreement. Wade's voice cracked. Eleanor, if you're in there, please, just come out. We can talk about this. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. She could hear the desperation in Wade's tone, the same false sincerity he'd used when he'd promised to help her, when he'd sworn things would get better. She'd believed him once. That mistake had cost her everything. She stepped away from the window. Eleanor! Wade called again. I know you're angry, but... Shut up, Wade. Coltrane's voice cut through the air like a blade. He turned his attention back to Silas. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice.
Already made my choice. Then you're a fool. Wouldn't be the first time. For a moment, no one moved. The valley held its breath. Eleanor could hear the creek running, the wind moving through the pines, the creak of leather as the horses shifted their weight. Then Coltrane nodded to the younger man. The rifle came up fast. Silas was faster. The first shot cracked through the morning air, and the younger man jerked backward in his saddle, his rifle spinning away into the dirt. He didn't fall. The bullet had taken him in the shoulder, high and clean, but he clutched at the wound and started cursing in a high, breathless voice. Coltrane's horse reared. Wade's bolted sideways, nearly throwing him. Next one goes center mass, Silas said, already working the lever on his rifle. Get off my land. Coltrane fought his horse under control, his face dark with fury. You just made a mistake. I've made plenty. One more won't kill me. It might. Then you'd better make sure you shoot straight. The younger man was still cursing, blood seeping between his fingers. Wade had managed to steady his horse, but he looked ready to pass out. Coltrane glanced at both of them, then back at Silas. This isn't over, he said. It is for today. Coltrane yanked his reins hard, wheeling his horse around. Wade followed, clumsy and panicked. The younger man took longer, struggling to mount properly with one arm useless, but eventually he got his horse turned and spurred it after the others. Silas watched them go. He didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared over the ridge, and even then he stood there for another minute, listening. Eleanor stepped out onto the porch. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself forward. You shot him. Winged him. He'll live. They'll come back. I expect they will. Silas finally lowered the rifle and turned to look at her. You still want to ride south? Eleanor stared at him. They'll bring the law, or more men. You can't stay here. This is my land. I'm not leaving. They'll kill you. Maybe. Silas walked past her, back toward the cabin. But that's my problem, not yours. Eleanor followed him inside. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Silas had shot a man. For her. A stranger he'd pulled from the river less than 24 hours ago. And now he was calmly setting his rifle by the door like he'd done nothing more complicated than chase off a coyote. Why? She asked. Silas didn't look at her. He moved to the fireplace and poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot hanging over the coals. Why what? Why did you do that? Told you already. I don't like men who think they can own people. That's not enough. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Silas took a long drink of coffee. When he set the cup down, his expression was unreadable. You're right, I don't know you, but I know men like Coltrane, and I know what happens to women when men like that get their hands on them. He paused. I've seen it before. Where? Doesn't matter. Point is, I saw it and I didn't stop it. This time I can. Eleanor sank into the chair by the table. Her ribs ached, her head throbbed. Everything felt too heavy, too complicated. You can't fight them alone. Don't plan to fight them at all if I can help it. They'll go back to town, lick their wounds, maybe come up with a new plan. That gives you time to get clear. And then what? They find me again in the next town, or the town after that? Then you keep moving. For how long? Silas didn't answer. Eleanor pressed her hands against her face. She'd spent the last 8 months running, from creditors, from Wade's failures, from the wreckage of her old life. And now she was supposed to keep running, keep looking over her shoulder, keep waiting for the next disaster to catch up with her. I'm tired, she said quietly. I know. I don't mean physically, I mean, she struggled to find the words. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of running, tired of waiting for someone to save me or destroy me or decide what happens next. She lowered her hands and looked at him. I don't want to run anymore. Silas met her gaze. Then what do you want? I want to fight. You don't know how. Then teach me. Silas set down his coffee cup. He studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. You understand what that means. You stay here, they'll come back. And when they do,
It won't be polite. I know. You could get hurt, killed even. I could get killed running too. At least this way I'd be choosing it. Silas rubbed a hand over his jaw. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He was quiet for a while, turning something over in his mind. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but if you're staying, you work. I'm not running a charity. What kind of work? Whatever needs doing. Cooking, cleaning, mending fence, feeding stock. You'll earn your keep. I can do that. And you do what I tell you, when I tell you. No arguments. Eleanor hesitated. She'd spent too many years being told what to do by men who didn't have her best interests at heart. But Silas wasn't Wade. He wasn't Coltrane. And right now, he was the only chance she had. Agreed, she said. Silas extended his hand. Eleanor shook it, feeling the roughness of his calluses against her palm. Then we've got work to do, he said. The first week was brutal. Silas hadn't been exaggerating when he said she'd work. He woke her before dawn and kept her moving until well after dark. Splitting wood, hauling water, scrubbing pots, patching the roof where it leaked, clearing brush from the fence line. Her hands blistered, then bled, then hardened. Her back ached constantly. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But she didn't complain. Silas didn't coddle her. He showed her how to do something once, then expected her to figure it out. When she struggled, he didn't offer sympathy, just pointed out what she was doing wrong and told her to try again. It was harsh, relentless, and exactly what she needed. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor felt useful. Not decorative, not valuable because of what she represented or who she'd married. Useful. Her hands built things, fixed things, kept things running. And at the end of each day, when she collapsed into the small cot Silas had set up for her in the back room, she slept hard and dreamless. Silas barely talked. He wasn't cold exactly, but he kept a careful distance. Meals were eaten in silence. Questions went unanswered. If Eleanor tried to make conversation, he'd respond with a grunt or a shrug and go back to whatever he was doing. It should have bothered her. Instead, it was a relief. She didn't have to perform, didn't have to manage his moods, or guess what he wanted. He wanted her to work, and she worked. Simple as that. But on the 8th day, something shifted. Eleanor was carrying a bucket of water from the creek when she heard a noise from the barn, a low, distressed sound, almost like a groan. She set the bucket down and walked over, pushing the door open carefully. Silas was inside, kneeling beside one of the horses. The animal, a big roan gelding, was lying on its side, breathing hard. Its eyes rolled white, and foam flecked its mouth. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. "Colic," Silas said without looking up. His hands moved over the horse's belly, pressing gently. He got into the grain storage. Ate too much. Will he be all right? Don't know yet. Silas's voice was tight. If his gut twists, he's done. Eleanor knelt beside him. What can I do? Nothing. Just stay back. Don't spook him. But Eleanor didn't move. She watched as Silas worked, his hands steady despite the tension in his shoulders. He spoke to the horse in a low, soothing voice, the same tone he might use with a frightened child. He massaged its belly, checked its gums, listened to its breathing. Hours passed. The horse thrashed once, nearly catching Silas with a hoof, but he dodged and kept working. Eleanor fetched water, blankets, anything he asked for without being asked. She didn't speak, just stayed close, ready. Finally, near dusk, the horse's breathing steadied. The tension in its body eased. It rolled upright, shook its head, and stood on shaky legs. Silas sat back on his heels, exhaling hard. He'll make it. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. You did it. Luck, mostly. No, you knew what to do. Silas glanced at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something like warmth entered his expression. You didn't panic. That helped. I've seen worse. I don't doubt it. They stood there in the dim barn, the horse nosing at the hay. The crisis passed. Silas wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at Eleanor properly. You're tougher than you look, he said. I've had to be.
Most women would have run by now. I'm not most women. Silas nodded slowly. No, you're not. It wasn't much. Just a few words, a brief acknowledgement. But something changed between them in that moment. A line crossed. A wall lowered, just a little. That night, over a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Silas asked her a question. Why'd you marry Wade's brother? Eleanor paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Security, or what I thought was security. You love him? No, but he was kind, and I was young and stupid enough to think kindness was the same as strength. What happened to him? Pneumonia. 3 winters ago. He went fast. She set her spoon down.
The creditors came before we'd even buried him. Turned out Richard had debts I didn't know about. They took the house, the furniture, everything. Wade showed up a week later with his promises. And you believed him. I didn't have a choice. It was Wade or the street. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You always have a choice. Might not be a good one, but it's still yours. Eleanor looked at him. Is that what you tell yourself? Every day. What choice did you make? Silas's expression closed off again. Doesn't matter. It does if we're going to keep working together. He studied her across the table, weighing something. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark valley. I had a family once, wife, daughter. We had a farm in Missouri, right along the border. When the war came, I tried to stay neutral. Didn't work. Bushwhackers came through one night, Confederate irregulars, though the uniform didn't matter much. They burned the farm, killed my wife. He paused. Took my daughter. Eleanor's breath caught. What happened to her? Don't know. I searched for 2 years, never found her. I'm sorry. Silas shook his head. Don't be. It was a long time ago. That's why you're here, alone. Easier that way. Eleanor stood and crossed to where he stood. Easier isn't always better. Silas turned to look at her. In the firelight, his face looked older, worn down by grief and regret. You think you can fix me, Mrs. Whitmore? No. I think we're both broken, and maybe that's enough. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, just once, and turned back to the window. They didn't speak again that night, but something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of understanding, of shared wounds that didn't need words. Eleanor went to bed feeling, for the first time since Richard died, that she wasn't completely alone. 2 weeks after Coltrane's visit, the first snow came. It started as a light dusting, then built into a steady fall that blanketed the valley in white. Silas moved through the work with quiet efficiency, securing the animals, checking the roof, stacking firewood by the door. Eleanor helped where she could, though her hands were still clumsy with the cold. They were bringing the last of the firewood inside when Silas stopped suddenly, his head cocked. What is it? Eleanor asked. Listen. She strained to hear over the wind. At first there was nothing. Then she caught it, a faint sound, rhythmic and metallic. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders, coming fast. Silas's jaw tightened. Get inside, bar the door. How many? Too many. Eleanor's pulse spiked. She started toward the cabin, then stopped. What about you? I'll handle it. Silas. Go. This time she obeyed. She ran to the cabin, slammed the door, and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place. Her hand shook as she moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. 6 riders emerged from the tree line. Coltrane led them, his black coat stark against the snow. Wade was there too, hunched and miserable. The others were strangers, hard-faced men with rifles and revolvers, the kind who got paid to do things decent people wouldn't. Silas stood in the center of the yard, rifle in hand. He looked impossibly small against the line of riders. Coltrane reined in his horse. Last chance, Granger. Hand her over and we'll leave you in peace. You know my answer. Then you're going to die. Probably. But I'll take a few of you with me. One of the men, a thick-shouldered brute with a scarred face, laughed. You think you're fast enough to drop 6 men before we put you down? Don't have to be fast, just have to be willing. The laughter died. Coltrane leaned forward in his saddle. This is your last warning. And this is mine, Silas said. You come 1 step closer and I start shooting. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Eleanor did something she hadn't planned. She unbarred the door and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. She walked past Silas into the open space between him and the riders and faced Coltrane directly. "You want me?" she said. "Then take me. But leave him alone." Silas swore under his breath. "Eleanor, get back inside." She ignored him. "I'll go with you, right now." "Just let him be." Coltrane's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm stupid? The second you're on that horse, he'll start shooting." "No, he won't. Will you, Silas?" Silas didn't answer. Eleanor turned to look at him. "You've done enough, more than enough. Let me go." "Like hell. This isn't your fight." "It is now." Coltrane made an impatient noise. "Touching. But I'm done negotiating." He nodded to the men beside him. 3 of them dismounted. Silas raised his rifle. Eleanor stepped between them. "Move," Silas growled. "No." "Eleanor, I won't let you die for me." The men kept coming, spreading out, trying to flank them. Silas tracked them with the rifle, his finger tight on the trigger. Eleanor stood her ground, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Then a voice rang out across the valley. "That's far enough." Everyone froze. A rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, a woman on a gray horse holding a shotgun across her saddle. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked carved from granite. "Mrs. Talbot," Silas said quietly. The woman ignored him. She rode forward slowly, her shotgun never wavering. "Coltrane, you and your boys are trespassing." Coltrane's expression darkened. "This doesn't concern you, Martha." "It does when you're on land adjacent to mine, and when you're threatening my neighbors." "Your neighbor shot one of my men." "Your man drew first. I heard about it in town." Martha's voice was flat, matter of fact. "You keep pushing this, and I'll make sure the territorial judge hears about it too." "You don't have the authority. I have a shotgun and 20 years of goodwill with every rancher in this valley. That's all the authority I need." She shifted her aim slightly, enough to make her point. "Now get off this land before I decide you're a threat to my property." Coltrane stared at her, his jaw working. Then he looked at Eleanor, at Silas, and back at Martha. Finally, he jerked his reins around. "This isn't finished," he said. "It is for today," Martha replied. Coltrane spurred his horse. The other riders followed, Wade stumbling along at the rear. Within moments, they disappeared into the trees. Martha lowered her shotgun. She looked at Silas, then at Eleanor, and shook her head. "You two are fools." "Probably," Silas agreed. "Come on, we need to talk." Martha Talbot's ranch house sat 3 miles west of Silas's property, nestled against a broad meadow where cattle grazed in the fading afternoon light. The building was larger than Silas's cabin, 2 stories, with a wide porch and smoke rising steady from the chimney. As they approached, Eleanor could see a young man working near the barn, his movements quick and practiced. Martha dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent more years in a saddle than out of one. She handed her reins to the young man without a word and gestured for Eleanor and Silas to follow her inside. The interior was warm, functional, and surprisingly comfortable. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The furniture was worn but well kept. Shelves lined one wall, packed with books, ledgers, and what looked like legal documents. Martha pulled off her coat and tossed it over a chair. "Sit," she said. Eleanor sat. Silas remained standing near the door, his rifle still in hand. Martha poured 3 glasses of whiskey from a bottle on the sideboard and set them on the table. She pushed one toward Eleanor, one toward the empty chair across from her, and kept the third for herself. "Drink," she said. "You look like you need it." Eleanor picked up the glass. The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth that followed was welcome. She hadn't realized how cold she was until now. Martha drained half her glass in one swallow. "Now, someone want to tell me what the hell is going on?" Silas finally moved. He set the rifle against the wall and took the chair, though he didn't touch the whiskey. "Coltrane's got a contract that says Eleanor belongs to him. He's trying to collect." "A contract?" Martha's voice was flat. "What kind of contract?" Eleanor spoke before Silas could. "My stepbrother-in-law owed him money, $1,200. When Wade couldn't pay, he signed me over as collateral.
Martha's expression didn't change, but her knuckles went white around her glass. And you agreed to this? I didn't know about it until Coltrane showed up to collect. Where's this contract now? Coltrane has it. Signed, witnessed, supposedly legal. Martha set her glass down hard enough to make the table jump. That son of a bitch, she looked at Silas. You know what you're doing? Getting in the middle of this? I know. Coltrane's got money, got connections. He'll bring lawyers, maybe the territorial marshal. You can't fight that with a rifle. Don't plan to fight it with just a rifle. Then what's your plan? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Don't have one yet. Martha laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're even dumber than I thought. Probably. And you? Martha turned to Eleanor. You planning to hide behind Silas till Coltrane gets tired and goes away? Eleanor met her gaze. No. Then what are you planning? I don't know yet, but I'm not running anymore. Martha studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right. Then we need to figure out how to break that contract. Can it be broken? Eleanor asked. Everything can be broken if you know where to hit it. Martha stood and walked to the shelves, pulling down a thick ledger. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning quickly. Coltrane operates out of Blackridge, right? Yes. Then the contract would have been filed with the county clerk. That means it's a matter of public record. She looked up. We need to see the original document, find out who witnessed it, what the exact terms are, whether it was filed properly. How do we do that? Eleanor asked. We go to Blackridge and look at the records ourselves. Silas shook his head. That's suicide. Coltrane's got people all over that town. So we don't go in the front door. Martha closed the ledger. I've got a friend who works in the county office. Owes me a favor. She can pull the document without anyone knowing. And if she can't, then we find another way. Martha's voice was firm. But sitting here waiting for Coltrane to come back with more men isn't a plan. It's just slow dying. Silas looked at Eleanor. What do you think? Eleanor's mind raced. The idea of going back to Blackridge made her stomach twist, but Martha was right. They couldn't just wait. Coltrane wouldn't stop. He'd proven that already. And if there was even a chance the contract could be challenged, invalidated, thrown out, I think we have to try, Eleanor said. Silas nodded slowly. Then we try. Martha refilled her glass. I'll send word to my friend tonight. Should hear back in a couple days. In the meantime, you two need to stay out of sight. Coltrane's probably got riders watching the roads. We can manage that, Silas said. And Eleanor. Martha's tone softened slightly. You need to understand something. Even if we break the contract, that doesn't mean this is over. Men like Coltrane don't let go of $1,200 without a fight. You're going to need more than legal tricks to get clear of him. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you look like a woman who's been running on luck and borrowed time. That only lasts so long. Eleanor felt something harden in her chest. I've survived worse than Coltrane. Maybe, but survival's not the same as winning. Then I'll learn to win. Martha held her gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, grim expression. You've got spine, I'll give you that. She raised her glass. Here's hoping it's enough. They drank in silence. The ride back to Silas's cabin was tense. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and white. Eleanor kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see riders emerging from the trees, but the valley remained empty. Silas didn't speak until they were inside, the door barred and the fire built back up. You shouldn't have stepped outside, but, he said. Eleanor turned to look at him. You would have died. Maybe, but that was my choice to make. And stepping outside was mine. Silas shook his head. You don't understand. Men like Coltrane, they don't respect courage. They see it as weakness, something to exploit. I don't care what he respects. I care that you're still alive. Why? The question caught her off guard. What? Why do you care? You've known me 3 weeks. I pulled you out of a river and put you to work. That doesn't make us family. Eleanor studied his face. There was something raw in his expression, something vulnerable beneath the hard exterior. No, but it makes us something. What? I don't know yet. She paused.
But I know I'm tired of watching people die because of me. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your husband, Richard, you blame yourself for his death?" "No, he got sick. That wasn't my fault." "But you blame yourself for what came after." Eleanor looked away. "I should have been smarter. Should have known Wade couldn't be trusted. Should have what? Seen the future?" Silas's voice was rough. "You did what you thought was right with the information you had. Can't ask more than that." "It wasn't enough." "It never is." Eleanor met his eyes again. There was understanding there, born from the same kind of guilt she carried. He'd lost his family and spent years wondering what he could have done differently. She saw it in the way he held himself, the way he kept everyone at arm's length. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she said quietly. Silas almost smiled. Broken pieces trying to hold each other up. Is that so bad? Probably, but he didn't move away, and neither did she. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the pines. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. What if Martha's plan didn't work? What if the contract was legal, binding, impossible to break? What if Coltrane came back with enough men that even Martha couldn't stop him? She heard movement from the main room, footsteps, the creak of the door opening. Eleanor sat up, her heart racing. "Silas? Go back to sleep." His voice came from the darkness. "Where are you going?" "Just checking the perimeter." Eleanor got up and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She found him on the porch, rifle in hand, staring out at the valley. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, turning the snow-covered landscape into something almost beautiful. "You think they're out there?" she asked. "Maybe. Probably not tonight, but soon." Eleanor stood beside him. "You could still tell me to leave, send me south like you planned." "I could." "Why don't you?" Silas was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because I'm tired of running too." "From what?" "The past. Guilt. All the things I couldn't save." He glanced at her. "Maybe I can save this. Save you." "I don't need saving. I need—" Eleanor struggled to find the words. "I need someone to stand with me. Not for me. With me." Silas nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll do." They stood together in the cold, watching the valley, and for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt something other than fear or exhaustion or despair. She felt hope, small, fragile, but real. Martha's message arrived 2 days later, delivered by the same young man Eleanor had seen at the ranch. His name was Tom, and he handed Silas a sealed envelope without ceremony. Silas opened it, read quickly, and looked up. "She got the contract. Wants us to come to her place tonight." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "What does it say?" "Doesn't say. Just that we need to see it ourselves." They arrived at Martha's ranch after dark. The older woman was waiting on the porch, a lantern in hand. She led them inside without a word and spread a document across the table. Eleanor leaned in, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. It was worse than she'd imagined. The contract wasn't just a simple debt agreement. It was a formal indenture signed and notarized, binding Eleanor Whitmore to the service of one Jonas Coltrane for a period of no less than 7 years, or until such time as the debt of $1,200 was satisfied through labor. 7 years. Eleanor felt the room spin. "It's legal," Martha said flatly. "Filed properly, witnessed by a county notary. Under territorial law, this holds weight." "There has to be a way to challenge it," Silas said. "There is, but it's not easy." Martha pointed to a section near the bottom. "The contract specifies that Eleanor consented to the terms as Wade Whitmore's dependent. If we can prove she wasn't legally his dependent, the whole thing falls apart." "She wasn't," Silas said. "She was his brother's widow. That doesn't make her Wade's property. Legally, it's complicated. Richard Whitmore died without a will. Wade claimed guardianship as next of kin. If that claim holds, then he had the right to enter into contracts on her behalf." Eleanor's hands clenched. "So I'm trapped." "Not necessarily." Martha pulled out another document, a letter written in careful script. "I did some digging. Turns out Wade Whitmore's claim of guardianship was never formally filed with the probate court. He just told people he was Eleanor's guardian and no one questioned it. Which means the contract is based on a false premise. Wade had no legal authority to sign Eleanor into indenture. The whole thing is void. Eleanor felt a surge of something close to relief. Then we can fight this. We can try, but we need proof, and we need a judge willing to hear the case. Martha's expression was grim. That's the hard part. Coltrane's got friends in the territorial government. He'll fight dirty. Then we fight dirtier, Silas said. Martha raised an eyebrow. You got something in mind? Maybe. Silas looked at Eleanor. You said Richard died without a will, but did he leave any papers, letters, deeds, anything that might prove you were independent? Eleanor thought hard. There was a letter from a lawyer in Philadelphia. It came a few weeks after Richard died. Wade took it, said he'd handle it. What did the letter say? I don't know. Wade never showed it to me. Martha leaned forward. If that letter proves you had independent assets, or that Richard intended you to inherit separately from Wade's claims, it could be enough to invalidate the guardianship. But Wade has it, and he's with Coltrane. Then we get it back. Eleanor stared at her. How? Martha smiled, cold, calculating. We make Wade an offer he can't refuse. The plan was simple, though not without risk. Martha would send word to Wade through one of her ranch hands, claiming she had information about a silver claim that might settle his debts. Wade, desperate and drowning in guilt, would likely jump at the chance. When he arrived, they'd confront him, demand the letter, and use whatever leverage they had to get him to cooperate. And if he refuses, Eleanor asked, then we remind him that aiding an illegal indenture is a crime, Martha said, and that we've got witnesses willing to testify. He could run. Where? He's got no money, no friends, and half the territory knows his face. He runs. He dies in a ditch somewhere. Martha's voice was matter of fact. Wade's not smart enough to see that yet, but he will. The message was sent. They waited. 3 days passed. Eleanor spent the time working alongside Silas, trying to keep her mind occupied. But the tension wound tighter with each hour. She kept expecting to see riders on the horizon, kept waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. On the 4th day, Tom rode up with news. He's coming, tomorrow, just after noon. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Just wait. That's what the message said. Silas looked at Martha. You believe that? No, but we planned for it anyway. They spent the evening preparing. Silas positioned himself near the barn with a clear line of sight to the road. Martha stationed Tom on the ridge with a rifle. Eleanor stayed inside the house, though every instinct screamed at her to be outside, to face Wade directly. Let us handle this, Martha had said. You stay out of sight until we know it's safe. Eleanor had agreed, though it grated against her. She wasn't used to letting others fight her battles, but she also wasn't stupid. If Coltrane came with Wade, her presence would only make things worse. Noon arrived. Then 1 hour passed. Then 2. Finally, Tom's whistle echoed down from the ridge. The signal. A single rider approaching from the east. Eleanor moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. She recognized the horse first, then the slumped figure in the saddle. Wade. He looked worse than she remembered. Thinner, grayer, his clothes hanging loose. He dismounted clumsily and stood in the yard, looking around like a man expecting a trap. Martha stepped out onto the porch. Wade Whitmore, took you long enough? Wade flinched. I got your message. Something about a silver claim? That was a lie. We need to talk. Wade's eyes darted toward the barn, the ridge, searching for threats. Where's Eleanor? Safe. Which is more than I can say for you. I didn't... Wade's voice cracked. I didn't have a choice. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true. Martha descended the porch steps slowly. You signed your sister-in-law into slavery to pay your debts. That makes you lower than dirt. Coltrane would have killed me. So you killed her instead, sold her like livestock. I thought, Wade swallowed hard, I thought maybe she'd be all right, that Coltrane would just put her to work in one of his businesses, keep her safe. Safe? Martha's laugh was harsh. You know what Coltrane does with women he owns? You really that stupid, or just that desperate to believe your own lies? Wade looked down at his feet. Silas emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. Wade saw him and went pale. "You shot my man," Wade said weakly. "He drew on me. I defended myself." Silas walked closer. "You got something I need. I don't have any money. Not money. A letter. From a lawyer in Philadelphia. Came to Eleanor after Richard died." Wade's face went blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Eleanor said. She stepped out onto the porch, and Wade's expression crumbled. "Eleanor, the letter, Wade, where is it? Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Wade's hand shook. He reached into his coat, fumbling, and pulled out a folded envelope. The paper was yellowed, creased from being carried. He held it out like it burned his fingers. Eleanor descended the steps and took it. She opened the envelope carefully, pulling out the letter inside. The script was formal, legal, precise. It was from Richard's lawyer, and it outlined a trust that Richard had established before his death. A small inheritance, not much, but enough to prove that Eleanor had independent means, enough to prove that she was never Wade's dependent, enough to break the contract. Eleanor looked up at Wade. "You knew about this." Yes. "And you hid it, because if I'd known, I could have survived without you." Wade's face twisted. "I was trying to help. You were trying to control me. And when that didn't work, you sold me." "Eleanor, please, get out." Wade stared at her. "What?" "Get out. Go back to Coltrane. Go to hell. I don't care. Just get away from me." "I can't go back. Then run. That's what you're good at, isn't it?" Eleanor's voice was cold. "Running, hiding, letting other people pay for your mistakes." Wade opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked at Martha, at Silas, then back at Eleanor. Finally, he turned and stumbled toward his horse. He mounted clumsily and rode off without looking back. Eleanor watched him disappear down the valley road, the letter still clutched in her hand. She felt something break inside her. Not grief, not anger, just a cold, final severing. Martha stepped up beside her. "You all right?" "No, but I will be." Silas joined them. "That letter's enough. We can take it to the territorial court, challenge the contract." "How long will that take?" Eleanor asked. "Weeks, maybe months. Depends on the judge." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, we keep our heads down and hope Coltrane doesn't do anything stupid." But Eleanor knew better. Coltrane wasn't the type to wait for courts and lawyers. He'd paid for her, and he'd come to collect, law or no law. She looked at Silas. "He's going to come back, with more men." "I know. We can't fight an army." "No, but we can make it cost him." Silas's jaw tightened. "And maybe that'll be enough." Eleanor wanted to believe him. But as the sun sank behind the mountains and the valley filled with shadows, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The feeling proved correct faster than Eleanor expected. 4 days after Wade's departure, Martha received word from town. Coltrane had filed a complaint with the territorial marshal, claiming theft of property and obstruction of justice. He'd named Silas Granger, Eleanor Whitmore, and Martha Talbot specifically. A deputy was already en route to investigate. Martha delivered the news in her kitchen, her expression grim. "They'll be here by tomorrow, maybe sooner." Silas set down his coffee cup. "What exactly is he claiming?" "That Eleanor stole herself, essentially. That you aided in the theft, and that I harbored a fugitive." Martha leaned against the counter. "It's horseshit, but it'll get a lawman out here asking questions." "We've got the letter," Eleanor said. "Proof that Wade had no authority." "That's a civil matter. The marshal's concerned with criminal charges, and until a judge rules on the contract's validity, Coltrane's claim technically stands." "So what do we do?" Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We go on the offensive." Silas looked at her sharply. "Meaning?" "Meaning we don't wait for Coltrane to dictate terms. We file our own complaint. Fraud, false indenture, coercion. Force him to defend himself in court instead of hiding behind that contract." "That'll take time," Eleanor said. "Time we don't have." "Maybe, but it'll also put him on notice, show the marshal that this isn't as simple as Coltrane wants it to look." Martha straightened. "I know a lawyer in Cheyenne. Good man, doesn't back down from a fight. I can get word to him, have him file the papers." "How long?" Silas asked.
Week, maybe 10 days if the weather holds. And in the meantime, we just wait? No, in the meantime, we make sure you've got witnesses.
People who'll testify that Eleanor came here of her own will, that she's been working honest labor, that there's no coercion. Martha looked at Eleanor. You're going to need to tell your story, all of it, to people who matter. Eleanor's stomach tightened. The thought of standing in front of strangers, recounting everything that had happened, Wade's betrayal, the river, the contract, made her want to run. But Martha was right. Silence wouldn't save her. I'll do it, she said. Good, because we're running out of options. The deputy arrived the next afternoon, riding a sturdy bay gelding and wearing the kind of expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His name was Henry Cole, and he was younger than Eleanor expected, maybe 30, with a weathered face and careful eyes. Martha met him at the property line. Eleanor and Silas stayed back, watching from the porch of Martha's house. Mrs. Talbot, Cole said, tipping his hat, got a complaint filed against you and some others. Need to ask a few questions. Ask away. Jonas Coltrane claims you're harboring a woman named Eleanor Whitmore, says she's bound to him by legal contract and that you're interfering with his property rights. Eleanor Whitmore is a guest on my property, Martha said evenly, and she's not anybody's property. That's not for me to decide, ma'am. I'm just here to determine the facts. Then here's a fact for you. Coltrane's contract is fraudulent. The man who signed it had no legal authority to do so. Cole pulled out a small notebook. You have proof of that? We do. Letter from a Philadelphia lawyer proving Eleanor had independent means. Wade Whitmore claimed guardianship he didn't have. I'll need to see that letter, Martha gestured toward the house. Eleanor's inside. You can ask her yourself. Cole dismounted and followed Martha up to the porch. Eleanor stood as he approached, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Mrs. Whitmore, Cole said, I need to ask you some questions. All right. Are you here of your own free will? Yes. Did you enter into any agreement with Jonas Coltrane? No. I didn't even know about the contract until Coltrane came to collect me. And Wade Whitmore? What's your relationship to him? He was my late husband's half-brother. He claimed he'd help me after Richard died. Instead, he used me as collateral for his debts. Cole scribbled in his notebook. You have documentation proving you weren't legally his dependent? Eleanor handed him the letter. Cole read it slowly, his expression neutral. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. This is a civil matter, he said, outside my jurisdiction. Then why are you here? Martha asked. Because Coltrane filed a criminal complaint. Theft, harboring. Those are matters I have to investigate. And what have you found? Cole looked at Eleanor, then at Silas, then back at Martha. I found a woman who doesn't want to go with Coltrane. That's not a crime. Martha's expression didn't change, but Eleanor saw something like relief flicker in her eyes. So you're not taking her? Martha pressed. Not without a judge's order. And from what I've seen, this needs to be settled in court, not by a deputy dragging people around. Cole closed his notebook. I'll file my report. Recommend the territorial court handle it. And Coltrane? I'll tell him the same thing. Cole turned to Eleanor. Ma'am, you should know this won't stop him. He's not the type to let something go just because a lawman says so. I know, Eleanor said quietly. Cole nodded and walked back to his horse. He mounted and rode off without another word. Silas exhaled slowly. That could have gone worse. It's not over, Martha said. Cole's a good man, but he's one deputy. Coltrane's got money and connections. He'll find another way. Eleanor watched the deputy disappear down the road. How long do you think we have? Not long. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep again. She lay on the cot in Martha's guest room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through scenarios. Coltrane hiring more men, Coltrane bribing a judge, Coltrane simply taking what he thought he owned and dealing with the consequences later. She heard footsteps in the hall and sat up. A moment later, there was a soft knock at the door. It's me, Silas's voice came through the wood. Eleanor wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and opened the door. Silas stood in the dim hallway, still dressed, his rifle in hand. Can't sleep either? She asked. Nope. You think he's coming tonight? Maybe. Or maybe I'm just getting paranoid in my old age.
Silas leaned against the door frame. Wanted to check on you. I'm all right. You're lying, Eleanor almost smiled.
Maybe a little. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Silas said, "When this is over, if we get through it, what are you going to do?" "I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should." "Why?" "Because you need something to fight for. Something more than just not being Coltrane's property." Silas's voice was quiet. "What do you want, Eleanor? Not what you're running from, what you're running toward." Eleanor looked down at her hands. No one had asked her that in years. Everyone had always told her what she should want: security, respectability, a good marriage, a proper life. But what did she want? "I want to matter," she said finally. "Not because of who I married or what I look like or what I can do for someone else. I want to matter because of who I am." Silas nodded slowly. "That's worth fighting for. Is it enough?" "Has to be." Eleanor met his eyes. There was something steady in his gaze, something that made her feel less alone. "What about you? What are you fighting for?" "Same thing, I guess. A chance to do something right." He paused. "Lost too many people. Let too many things slip away. Maybe this time I can hold on." "To what?" "To whatever this is." He gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever we're building here." Eleanor felt something warm unfold in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was connection, partnership, the beginning of something that might survive if they were strong enough to protect it. "We'll hold on," she said. "Together." Silas nodded. "Together." He turned to go, then stopped. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "You're braver than you think." Before she could respond, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hall. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating steady and sure. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn. Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking glass. She rolled off the cot, her body moving on instinct, and grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. The hallway was dark, but she could hear shouting from downstairs, Martha's voice, sharp and commanding, and then a gunshot that made her ears ring. Eleanor ran toward the stairs. The front room was chaos. 2 men were grappling with Martha near the overturned table, trying to pin her arms. A third was advancing on Silas, who'd taken cover behind the stone fireplace. Tom was on the floor, clutching his leg, blood seeping between his fingers. Eleanor didn't think. She swung the poker hard, catching one of the men holding Martha across the shoulders. He howled and stumbled back. Martha twisted free, grabbed a cast iron skillet from the counter, and brought it down on the second man's head with a sickening crack. Silas fired. The man advancing on him dropped, clutching his thigh. More shouting from outside. The sound of horses, boots on the porch. "Back door!" Martha yelled. Eleanor grabbed Tom under the arms and dragged him toward the kitchen. He was heavy, dead weight, and her muscles screamed in protest. Silas provided cover, firing twice more to keep the attackers pinned. They burst through the back door into the cold pre-dawn air. Martha was already there, shotgun in hand, scanning the darkness. "How many?" Silas asked. "At least 6. Maybe more." "Coltrane?" "Didn't see him, but these are his men." Tom groaned. Eleanor knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound in his leg. The blood was dark, pulsing. "We need to stop the bleeding." Martha tore a strip from her skirt and handed it to Eleanor. "Tie it tight. We'll get him to the barn." They half carried, half dragged Tom across the yard. Behind them, the house erupted in more gunfire. Eleanor heard wood splintering, glass shattering, voices shouting orders. The barn was dark and smelled of hay and horses. Martha lit a lantern with shaking hands. In the yellow light, Tom's face was pale, slick with sweat. "How bad?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Bad enough," Martha said. "But you'll live if you stop moving." Silas appeared in the doorway. "They're spreading out, trying to surround us." "How long can we hold them?" "Not long. We're outgunned and they know it." Eleanor finished tying the bandage and stood. Her hands were covered in blood. "We can't just wait for them to pick us off." "What do you suggest?" Martha asked. "We run, take the horses, head for the trees. They can't follow us all in the dark." "Tom can't ride like this." "Then I'll stay with him."
Eleanor said. You two go. Get help. Silas shook his head. Not a chance. It's the only way. I said no. His voice was hard. We're not splitting up. Then we're going to die here. Maybe. But we do it together.
Before Eleanor could argue, a voice rang out from the yard. Granger, I know you're in there. Coltrane. Silas moved to the barn door, rifle raised. Through the gap, Eleanor could see Coltrane standing in the yard, flanked by 4 armed men. The sky was lightening, turning the world gray and stark. What do you want? Silas called. I want what's mine. Send out the woman and we'll leave. She's not yours. The law says different. The law's gonna say you're a kidnapper and a fraud when this goes to court. Coltrane laughed. Court? You think I'm waiting for court? I paid good money for that woman. I'm taking her now. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. There was a long pause. Then Coltrane said, I'm giving you one chance, Granger. Send her out or I burn you out. Your choice. Silas glanced back at Eleanor. His expression was unreadable. Eleanor stepped forward. Let me talk to him. Eleanor, I'm not going with him, but maybe I can buy us time. Martha grabbed her arm. It's a trap. Everything's a trap, but I'm tired of hiding. Eleanor pulled free and walked to the door. Silas moved aside, though every line of his body radiated tension. Eleanor stepped into the doorway, visible but not exposed. Coltrane's eyes locked onto her. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, you've caused me a lot of trouble. Good, Eleanor said. You deserve it. Do you think this is a game? No. I think it's my life, and you don't get to own it. I have a contract that says otherwise. A fraudulent contract based on authority Wade never had. Coltrane's expression hardened. Doesn't matter. You're coming with me. No, I'm not. Then your friends die, starting with that old woman and the cripple in the barn. You'll hang for murder. Maybe, but you'll still be mine. Coltrane raised his hand and his men lifted their rifles. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. This was it, the moment where everything collapsed or held. She took a breath and stepped fully into the open. If you want me, she said, her voice carrying across the yard, then come get me yourself. No guns, no men, just you and me. Coltrane stared at her. Then he laughed. You think you can fight me? I think you're a coward who hides behind contracts and hired guns. Prove me wrong. The laughter died. Coltrane's face went cold. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for. A fair fight. Something you've never given anyone in your life. For a moment, Coltrane didn't move. Then he handed his rifle to the man beside him and stepped forward. All right, Mrs. Whitmore. Let's see what you've got. Silas grabbed Eleanor's arm. Don't do this. I have to. He'll kill you. Maybe, but at least it'll be my choice. She pulled free and walked out to meet Coltrane. The yard was silent except for the wind. Eleanor's hands were empty. She had no weapon, no plan, just the cold certainty that she would not go quietly. Coltrane stopped 10 feet away. He was taller than she remembered, broader, but there was something ugly in his eyes, a cruelty that had always been there, just hidden beneath the surface. Last chance, he said. Come with me now, and I'll forget this happened. No. Then you're a fool. Coltrane lunged. Eleanor dodged, barely. His fist grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She stumbled but kept her footing, her mind racing. He was stronger, faster. She couldn't match him blow for blow. She had to be smarter. Coltrane came at her again. This time Eleanor didn't dodge. She stepped into the attack, driving her knee up hard into his stomach. The air rushed out of him in a grunt. She followed with an elbow to his jaw, putting all her weight behind it. Coltrane staggered back, blood on his lip. His expression shifted from contempt to surprise. Where'd you learn that? He growled. Surviving, Eleanor said. He charged again, wilder this time. Eleanor ducked under his swing and drove her fist into his kidney. He roared, spinning, and caught her with a backhand that sent her sprawling into the dirt. Pain exploded across her face. Her vision blurred. She tasted copper. Get up, she thought. Get up or die. Eleanor pushed herself to her knees. Coltrane was already coming for her, his boot raised to kick her in the ribs. A gunshot cracked through the air. Coltrane froze, his foot inches from Eleanor's chest. "That's enough." Eleanor turned her head. A man on horseback sat at the edge of the yard, older, with gray hair and a badge pinned to his coat. Behind him were 4 more riders, all armed, all wearing the same badges. Deputy Cole rode up beside the older man. "Told you it was bad, Marshal." The marshal dismounted slowly. He looked at Coltrane, then at Eleanor, then at the armed men surrounding the barn. "Somebody want to explain what the hell is going on here?" Coltrane lowered his foot. "This is a private matter." "Private matter doesn't involve 6 armed men attacking a ranch at dawn." The marshal's voice was cold. "You're Jonas Coltrane?" "I am." "Then you're under arrest." Coltrane's face went purple. "On what charge?" "Assault, attempted kidnapping, destruction of property. We'll start there and see what else turns up." The marshal gestured to his men. "Disarm them." The deputies moved quickly, collecting rifles and revolvers from Coltrane's men. Coltrane stood rigid, his jaw working. "You can't do this," he said. "I have a legal contract, which is being challenged in court. Until a judge rules, you don't have any rights to that woman." The marshal looked at Eleanor. "Ma'am, you all right?" Eleanor stood slowly, wiping blood from her mouth. "I'll live." "Good. You'll need to give a statement." "I will." The marshal turned back to Coltrane. "As for you, you're coming with us. We'll let the territorial court sort this out." Coltrane's eyes burned with rage, but he didn't resist as the deputies led him toward the horses. As they passed Eleanor, he leaned in close. "This isn't over," he whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "It is." They took him away. The sun rose over the valley, painting the destruction in pale gold. Martha's house was riddled with bullet holes, windows shattered, furniture destroyed, but it was still standing, and so were they. Silas helped Eleanor back to the barn where Tom was sitting up, pale but conscious. "You're insane," Silas said. "Probably," Eleanor agreed. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." Silas shook his head, but there was something like admiration in his expression. "You've got more guts than sense." "Is that a compliment?" "Closest thing you're getting from me." Martha appeared in the doorway, her shotgun still in hand. She looked at Eleanor, bruised, bloody, but upright, and nodded slowly. "You'll do," she said. Eleanor smiled despite the pain. "Thanks." "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a court case to win." But Martha's tone was lighter than Eleanor had ever heard it. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." As they walked back toward the damaged house, Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. Not relief. It was too soon for that. But certainty. She'd fought, and she'd won. Not the war, maybe, but this battle. And that was enough for now. The weeks that followed felt suspended between victory and waiting. Coltrane sat in the territorial jail in Cheyenne, but his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Garrett who wore expensive suits and spoke in careful legalese, was already filing motions demanding bail, challenging the arrest. Martha's lawyer, a gruff veteran named Samuel Harding, with silver hair and a voice like gravel, countered every move with motions of his own. Eleanor watched it all unfold from Martha's ranch, which had become a kind of fortress. Tom's leg was healing slowly, and he'd taken to sitting on the porch with a rifle across his lap, watching the road. Silas had moved his few belongings from his cabin to Martha's barn, reasoning that they were safer together than separated. Martha herself seemed energized by the fight, spending long evenings drafting letters, organizing witnesses, preparing for the trial that would determine everything. Eleanor threw herself into the work of rebuilding. She patched the shattered windows with oiled paper until proper glass could be ordered. She helped Silas repair the fence line that had been trampled during the attack. She learned to cook over Martha's old stove, burning more meals than she succeeded at first, but improving with stubborn persistence. The physical labor helped. It gave her hands something to do, her mind something to focus on besides the approaching court date. But at night, lying in the small room Martha had given her, Eleanor felt the weight of what was coming. She'd stood up to Coltrane once. Now she'd have to do it again, but this time in front of a judge, with her entire future hanging on words and documents and the whims of territorial law. Martha found her one evening in the kitchen, scrubbing pots long after dinner had ended. "You're going to wear a hole through that pan," Martha said. Eleanor looked down. Her hands were red, the water cold. She set the pot aside. "Sorry, I was thinking about the trial. About everything." Eleanor dried her hands on a towel. "What happens if we lose?" Martha pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "We don't lose." "But if we do?" "Then we appeal. Take it to a higher court. Keep fighting until we run out of options." "And if we run out of options?" Martha's expression hardened. "Then you run. And you keep running until you're somewhere Coltrane's money doesn't reach." Eleanor sat across from her. "I'm tired of running." "I know, but survival's more important than pride." "Is it?" Eleanor met her eyes. "Because I'm starting to think pride is the only thing I've got left that's actually mine." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and gripped Eleanor's hand. "You've got more than pride. You've got strength. You've got people willing to fight for you. And you've got a legitimate legal case." She squeezed once, hard. "We're going to win this." "You sound certain." "I am. Because the alternative is unacceptable." Eleanor wanted to believe her, but certainty felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The trial was set for early March in the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne. The journey took 2 days by wagon, and Martha insisted they all go. Eleanor, Silas, Tom, despite his still healing leg, and 3 other ranchers who'd agreed to testify as character witnesses. Cheyenne was bigger than Eleanor expected, with broad streets and brick buildings that spoke of permanence and civilization. The courthouse itself was an imposing structure with white columns and a copper dome that gleamed in the weak winter sun. Samuel Harding met them outside. He was shorter than Eleanor had imagined, with shrewd eyes and hands scarred from decades of farm work before he'd studied law. He shook Eleanor's hand with surprising gentleness. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've got a good case. Don't let Garrett rattle you." "What will he try?" Eleanor asked. "He'll paint you as a runaway debtor, try to make the contract seem reasonable, suggest that Wade had legitimate authority as your guardian." Harding's expression was grim. "He'll also try to discredit you personally, make you seem unstable, ungrateful, morally questionable." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How?" "By twisting facts. You lived with Wade for months. He'll suggest impropriety. You fled into the wilderness. He'll call it irrational. You're living at Martha's ranch with Silas nearby. He'll imply scandal." Harding held her gaze. "None of it's true, but he'll say it anyway. You need to stay calm, answer truthfully, and don't let him provoke you." "I can do that." "Can you?" Harding's tone wasn't unkind, but it was skeptical. "Because the moment you lose your temper, you lose the jury." Eleanor took a breath. "I understand." They entered the courthouse together. The courtroom was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, with wooden benches and high windows that let in pale March light. A handful of spectators were already seated, townspeople drawn by gossip, journalists scribbling in notebooks, and in the back row, a cluster of men who looked like they worked for Coltrane. Coltrane himself sat at the defendant's table beside Garrett, wearing a dark suit and an expression of wounded dignity. When Eleanor entered, his eyes tracked her with cold calculation. Eleanor forced herself to look away and took her seat beside Harding. The judge arrived, a weathered man in his 60s named Harrison, with a reputation for fairness but little patience for nonsense. He called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Garrett opened with a statement that painted Coltrane as a legitimate businessman wronged by an ungrateful woman and her accomplices. He spoke of the contract as if it were sacred, of Wade's guardianship as established fact, of Eleanor's flight as theft and betrayal. "Mr. Coltrane extended good faith to Wade Whitmore in his time of need," Garrett said, his voice smooth. "He accepted a legal agreement in lieu of cash payment. Mrs. Whitmore was aware of this arrangement and initially accepted her obligations. It was only later, after she'd been influenced by outside parties, that she reneged on the agreement and fled." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was a distortion, but Garrett delivered it with such confidence that it almost sounded plausible. Harding stood for his opening statement. He was blunt, direct, stripping away Garrett's polish to reveal the bones of the case. "This is not a contract dispute," Harding said. This is an attempted enslavement of a free woman by a man who thought he could buy human beings like cattle. Wade Whitmore had no legal authority to sign Mrs. Whitmore into indenture. He was not her guardian, not her keeper, not her anything except a distant relation who exploited her vulnerability for his own gain. The contract is void, and Mr. Coltrane knew it was void when he filed it. The trial proceeded in waves of testimony and cross-examination. Wade was called first, pale, shaking, barely able to meet anyone's eyes. Under Harding's questioning, he admitted he'd never formally filed for guardianship, that Eleanor had her own inheritance, that he'd hidden the lawyer's letter. "Why did you hide it?" Harding asked. Wade's voice was barely audible. "Because I needed her to depend on me. And when Mr. Coltrane demanded payment, I didn't know what else to do. I thought maybe it would work out." "You thought you could sell a human being and it would work out?" Wade didn't answer. Garrett's cross-examination tried to paint Wade as a victim of circumstance, a man overwhelmed by debt and grief. But even he seemed to realize Wade made a poor, sympathetic figure. The testimony ended with Wade slumped in his chair, defeated. Next came the character witnesses, ranchers who testified that Eleanor had worked honestly at Martha's ranch, that she'd fled Coltrane's men out of legitimate fear, that there was no scandal in her conduct. Garrett tried to twist their words, but they held firm. Then it was Eleanor's turn. Harding called her to the stand. Eleanor walked to the witness chair on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Harding's questions were gentle, designed to let her tell her story in her own words. Eleanor spoke about Richard's death, Wade's promises, the discovery of the contract. She described the moment she'd learned she'd been sold, the decision to flee, the river. "Why did you go into the river?" Harding asked. "Because I'd rather die than be owned," Eleanor said quietly. "I'd rather take my chances with the current than let Coltrane decide what happened to me." "And after Mr. Granger pulled you out?" "I worked. I learned to survive. I started building something that was mine." Harding nodded. No further questions. Garrett stood. He approached the witness stand slowly, his expression sympathetic in a way that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sorry for your losses. Truly, but I need to ask you some difficult questions." Eleanor met his eyes. "Go ahead." "You lived with Wade Whitmore for 8 months, is that correct?" "Yes." "In that time, did he provide you with food and shelter?" "Yes." "Did he ask for anything in return?" Eleanor hesitated. She could see the trap. "No monetary payment, if that's what you mean." "But you were dependent on his charity." "I worked wherever I could, but yes, I depended on him for housing." "And when Mr. Coltrane arrived with the contract, you claim you knew nothing about it." "I didn't know. Wade never told me." "Convenient." "It's the truth." Garrett smiled. "Let me ask you this. If you were truly independent, as you claim, why didn't you leave Wade sooner?" Eleanor felt her temper rising. "Because I had nowhere to go." "No family, no friends?" "My husband died. His creditors took everything. Wade was all I had." "So you were in fact dependent." "I was vulnerable. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" Garrett's tone sharpened. "You had no money, no resources, no support. Wade took you in, and when he fell on hard times himself, he made a difficult decision. He sold me. He entered into a legal contract that would have provided for both of you." Eleanor's voice rose despite herself. "He signed away 7 years of my life without asking me. That's not providing. That's slavery." "Mrs. Whitmore, please." "No." Eleanor leaned forward. "You want to paint this as some kind of charitable arrangement, but it wasn't. Coltrane bought me like I was livestock. And the only reason we're in this courtroom is because I refuse to accept it." Garrett's expression hardened. "You refuse to accept a legal obligation." "I refuse to be property, even if it meant breaking the law." "There's no law that makes me someone's property, not anymore." Garrett studied her for a moment. Then he said, "You're currently living at Martha Talbot's ranch, is that correct?" "Yes." "And Silas Granger is also staying there?" "In the barn." "Yes." "How would you describe your relationship with Mr. Granger?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. "He saved my life. We're friends." "Just friends?" Yes. You're certain? Objection, Harding said sharply. Relevance? I'm establishing Mrs. Whitmore's credibility, Garrett said smoothly. Judge Harrison frowned. Overruled. But get to the point, counselor. Garrett turned back to Eleanor. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you fled to Mr. Granger specifically because you hoped he would protect you? I didn't flee to him. I fled into the river and he pulled me out. But you stayed with him. He offered me shelter. I worked for it. And now you're living in close proximity to him at Mrs. Talbot's ranch. Some might say that's inappropriate for a widow. Eleanor's hands clenched. Some might say a lot of things. That doesn't make them true. So you deny any improper relationship? There's nothing improper about survival, Eleanor said coldly. I worked. I earned my place. And if you're trying to suggest that I owe Coltrane my freedom because I accepted help from decent people, then you're as morally bankrupt as he is. The courtroom went silent. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor took a breath. I apologize, Your Honor, but I won't apologize for defending my character. Garrett smiled thinly. No further questions. Eleanor stepped down, her legs shaking. Harding caught her eye and gave a small nod. She'd held her ground. That was something. The final testimony came from an unexpected source. Deputy Cole took the stand and described what he'd found when he'd investigated Coltrane's complaint. A woman clearly unwilling to go with Coltrane, a contract based on questionable authority, an attempted kidnapping disguised as property recovery. In your professional opinion, Harding asked, was Mrs. Whitmore in danger from Mr. Coltrane? Yes, sir. I believed then, and I believe now, that if she'd gone with him, she would have been subjected to treatment no free person should endure. Garrett tried to discredit Cole's testimony, but the deputy was unshakable. He'd seen too much in his years of law enforcement to be rattled by a slick lawyer. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final afternoon, both lawyers gave their closing arguments. Garrett painted Coltrane as a wronged creditor, Eleanor as an ungrateful debtor who'd manipulated sympathetic ranchers into helping her evade justice. Harding tore the contract apart piece by piece, showing how it was built on fraud and false authority, and how Coltrane had knowingly participated in an illegal arrangement. Then they waited. Judge Harrison retired to his chambers. The courtroom emptied slowly, people drifting out to smoke or eat, or simply escape the tension. Eleanor sat on a bench outside, her body exhausted, her mind numb. Silas sat beside her. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, the bailiff emerged. Judge is ready. They filed back into the courtroom. Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Judge Harrison took his seat. He looked tired, but his expression was unreadable. I've reviewed the evidence and the testimony, he said. This case hinges on one central question. Did Wade Whitmore have legal authority to enter into a contract of indenture on behalf of Eleanor Whitmore? Eleanor held her breath. The evidence shows clearly that he did not. Mr. Whitmore never filed for legal guardianship. Mrs. Whitmore had independent means, proven by the letter from her late husband's attorney. The contract is therefore void. Relief crashed over Eleanor like a wave. Furthermore, Harrison continued, I find that Mr. Coltrane knowingly participated in this fraudulent arrangement. The testimony shows that he was aware of the questionable nature of Mr. Whitmore's authority and proceeded anyway. His subsequent actions, including the armed attack on Mrs. Talbot's property, demonstrate a pattern of behavior inconsistent with legitimate business practices. Coltrane's face went dark. Therefore, I rule in favor of the plaintiff. The contract is declared null and void. Mrs. Whitmore is free of any obligation to Mr. Coltrane. Additionally, Mr. Coltrane is hereby ordered to pay restitution for damages to Mrs. Talbot's property in the amount of $500 and is permanently enjoined from any further contact with Mrs. Whitmore. Harrison's gavel came down. It was over. Eleanor sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Free. She was free. Beside her, Harding was shaking hands with someone. Martha was hugging her. Silas's hand found hers and squeezed once, hard. Across the courtroom, Coltrane stood, his face twisted with rage. Garrett was speaking to him in low, urgent tones, but Coltrane shook him off. He looked at Eleanor, and the hatred in his eyes was so pure it made her skin crawl. Then the bailiff was leading him away, and he was gone. Eleanor stood on shaking legs. "It's really over?" "It's over," Harding confirmed. "You're free." The word felt strange in her mouth. Free. She'd been so many things: wife, widow, refugee, fugitive. But free? That was something new. The journey back to the valley was quiet. Eleanor spent most of it staring out at the landscape, watching the mountains grow larger as they approached. She'd left Philadelphia as a lady. She'd arrived in Black Ridge as a desperate woman with no options. And now she didn't know what she was. But she had time to figure it out. Martha's ranch came into view as the sun was setting, painting the damaged house in gold and amber. It still bore the scars of the attack: bullet holes, broken windows, splintered wood. But it was standing. They all were. That night, they gathered in Martha's kitchen for a simple meal. Tom was there. His leg finally healed enough to walk without a cane. The other ranchers who'd testified came too, along with a few neighbors who'd heard about the verdict and wanted to celebrate. It wasn't fancy, just stew and bread and whiskey, but it felt like the best meal Eleanor had ever had. Martha raised her glass. "To Eleanor, who taught us all what it means to fight." They drank. Later, after the others had left and the house had gone quiet, Eleanor found Silas on the porch. He was staring out at the valley, his rifle leaning against the railing more from habit than necessity. "You did it," he said without turning. Eleanor joined him. "We did it. What now?" It was the same question he'd asked weeks ago, but this time Eleanor had an answer. "I want to stay," she said. "Here, in the valley." Silas looked at her. "Martha's ranch? Maybe. Or maybe my own place. I've got that inheritance from Richard. It's not much, but it's enough to start." She paused. "I want to build something that's mine." "That's a hard life." "Harder than what I've been through?" Silas almost smiled. "Fair point." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Silas said, "You know anything about ranching?" "Not a thing." "Farming?" "Even less." "Building?" "I can learn." Silas nodded slowly. "I could teach you, if you wanted." Eleanor turned to look at him. "Is that an offer?" "Might be." "What would it cost me?" "Your company, your work, your trust?" He met her eyes. "And maybe, eventually, more, if you're willing." Eleanor felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not the desperate need she'd felt with Richard, the fear of being alone that had driven her to accept security over affection. This was different, quieter, built on shared hardship and mutual respect. "I'm willing," she said. Silas smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Then I guess we've got work to do." "I guess we do." Spring came to the valley slowly. The snow melted, revealing brown grass that would green with time. Eleanor used her inheritance to purchase a small parcel of land adjacent to Silas's property. Together, they began building a cabin. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a roof, but it was hers. Martha helped, of course. She was there almost every day, offering advice, lending tools, occasionally stepping in when Eleanor's inexperience threatened to bring down a wall. Tom recovered fully and took a job as Martha's foreman, managing the ranch while she focused on expanding her legal advocacy work. She discovered she had a talent for helping women in situations similar to Eleanor's, and word had spread. By summer, she was consulting on cases across the territory. Eleanor learned to work with her hands in ways she'd never imagined. She learned to split logs, mix mortar, drive nails straight. She learned to read the weather, manage livestock, fix things that broke. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned. She was stronger than she'd ever been. And slowly, carefully, she and Silas built something together. It wasn't romance, not exactly. Or not only romance, it was partnership. They worked side by side during the day, building the cabin, planting a garden, repairing Silas's old barn. In the evenings, they talked about the past, about the future, about the 1,000 small decisions that came with building a life from scratch. Silas told her about his daughter, the search that had consumed him, the guilt that still surfaced in quiet moments. Eleanor told him about the loneliness of her marriage, the terror of losing everything, the moment in the river when she'd thought she was ready to die. They healed each other, piece by piece. By autumn, the cabin was finished. It was small, simple, but it was solid. Eleanor stood in the doorway on the first day, looking out at the valley, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Silas came to stand beside her. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect. It's got gaps in the chinking, the chimney draws funny, and the door sticks when it's humid." Eleanor smiled. "I said it's perfect, not that it's flawless." Silas laughed quietly. "Fair enough." They stood together, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Eleanor," Silas said after a while. "Yes?" "I've been thinking." "About?" "About what comes next, for us." Eleanor's heart beat faster. "What have you been thinking? That I'm tired of living alone, that I'm too old to keep pretending I don't need anyone." He turned to look at her. "And that I'd like you to be more than a neighbor." "What would I be?" "My wife, if you'll have me." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "That's not very romantic." "I'm not a romantic man." "No." "You're honest, and kind, and stubborn as hell." She reached for his hand. "Yes." "Yes?" "Yes, I'll marry you." Silas pulled her close, and they stood there in the doorway of her imperfect cabin, holding each other as the valley darkened around them. The wedding was small, held at Martha's ranch with Tom and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. There was no minister. Eleanor and Silas both had complicated relationships with faith, so Martha performed the ceremony herself, reading from a book of territorial law and adding her own words about partnership and resilience. Eleanor wore a simple dress, blue like the Wyoming sky. Silas wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises to stand together, to work together, to face whatever came next as equals. When it was done, Martha smiled and said, "You're married, now get to work." Everyone laughed. The celebration was modest but joyful. There was music. Tom had a fiddle and played surprisingly well. There was dancing, food, whiskey. Eleanor danced with Silas, then with Tom, then with Martha, who surprised everyone by being remarkably light on her feet. As the evening wore on and people began drifting home, Eleanor found herself alone on the porch again. She looked out at the valley, at the land she'd fought for, the life she'd built. Silas joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Tired?" "A little, but good tired. We should head back. Got an early start tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "Same as today. Work, building, living." He kissed the top of her head. "The rest of our lives." Eleanor leaned into him. "I can think of worse fates." They walked home together under a sky full of stars, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole. Winter came again. But this time Eleanor was ready. She and Silas weathered the storms together, keeping the fire burning, the stock fed, the cabin warm. They talked through the long evenings, made plans for spring, dreamed about the future. And sometimes late at night when the wind howled and the cold pressed in, Eleanor would think about the woman she'd been. The desperate widow standing outside the Black Ridge saloon, contemplating surrender. That woman felt like a stranger now. Eleanor had become something else. Something harder, stronger, forged in the crucible of survival and choice. She'd lost everything, her husband, her home, her old life. But in losing it, she'd found something more valuable, herself. By the time spring returned, Eleanor's story had begun to spread. Not because she sought attention, but because Martha couldn't help telling it to the women who came to her for help. The tale of the widow who'd refused to be owned, who'd fought the law and won, who'd built a life on her own terms. It became a kind of legend, exaggerated in some tellings, simplified in others, but always carrying the same essential truth, that survival was possible, that freedom was worth fighting for, that even in the hardest places women could claim their own lives. Eleanor heard the stories sometimes, passed along by travelers or mentioned in letters. They made her uncomfortable at first. She'd never set out to be anyone's hero. She'd just been trying to survive. But as time passed, she came to understand that the story mattered less than what it represented. Hope. Possibility. The idea that you could be ground down to nothing and still rise, that was worth something. 5 years after the trial, Eleanor stood in her garden, pulling weeds from between rows of vegetables. The cabin had grown, Silas had added a room, then another, and they were planning a small barn for the horses. Her hands were rough, her face weathered. She looked nothing like the Philadelphia lady she'd once been. She looked like herself. Silas came walking up from the lower pasture, leading a horse. "Got a visitor," he called. Eleanor straightened, shading her eyes. A woman on horseback was approaching, young, maybe 20, with dark hair and frightened eyes. Eleanor knew that look. She'd worn it herself once. The woman dismounted clumsily. "Are you Eleanor Granger?" "I am." "I heard—" The woman's voice shook. "I heard you help women in trouble." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where a man thinks he owns you." Eleanor and Silas exchanged a glance. Then Eleanor stepped forward and extended her hand. "Come inside," she said. "Tell me everything." As they walked toward the cabin, Eleanor felt the familiar weight of purpose settle over her shoulders. She'd fought her own battle and won, but there were others still fighting. And as long as there were women who needed help, she'd be there. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, just as someone who'd survived and who knew the way through. The sun climbed higher over the valley, warming the earth, bringing new growth. And in the small cabin on the edge of the wilderness, Eleanor Granger sat down to listen to another woman's story, ready to fight one more battle. Because that's what survivors did. They stood up, they fought back, and they helped others do the same. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.